invite you to participate. You know, I will ask for people to type some things into the chat throughout today. And if you have any questions at all as we're going through, please just put them right in and we will answer them as in real time as helpful. And Michael is here to help us make sure we stay on track with that. So my agenda for today, this is a little bit about how I think about macro level social work, particularly and in child welfare. I'd like us to do a little bit of really connecting the definition of client and macro systems, obviously anchoring that work in trauma-informed perspectives. We're going to go way back to those foundational social work theories, and then really to an examination of our CSWE competencies and our NASW code of ethics around how those really promote macro level social work, no matter what role we're working in. And then, of course, reminding ourselves about the importance of self-care and even really thinking more deeply about how that is impacted and how that shows up in macro work. So to get started, everyone, we're going to do a little bit of grounding. I'm going to ask you a few questions. You don't need to type these into the chat. Think about them for yourself. You may even just choose to take some personal notes. So anytime we want to be reflective and grounded, of course, remember, get those feet flat on the floor. Make sure you can feel your body and your hips anchored in your chair. You can choose to lower your gaze if you need to. Unless you're writing, make sure that your hands are concretely connected to something, some physical space around you. Take that deep breath and just think for a minute. I'd like you to think about how you got here. And I don't mean how you got to this virtual presentation today or how you got to the physical space that you're in today. I want you to think about how you got to this place in your life. What are all of the experiences that you've had, the messages you've heard, the information that you've learned throughout your entire life, starting in childhood, that have informed every decision you've made, every reaction you've had or choice that you've had in terms of getting to this place in your professional and personal life. Just take a moment and think about all of that. And as those messages and those experiences come to mind for you, I'd like to ask you, what is it like? What is it like to be in the world and have had all of those experiences? Maybe some of those messages and experiences have been encouraging and supportive, and maybe some of them have been discouraging and challenging. And if you can, just think for a moment how you manage it. How have you managed being where you are today, getting to where you are today in your life, considering everything you've experienced and all of the impact that that's had on you? Maybe you have great concrete answers for how you manage it. And maybe depending on some of those experiences, you don't. You're not sure. You look back and say, well, maybe I would have done that differently. Okay. All along a continuum. I ask you to think about these things right now because how you got to this place in your life, all of those messages, all of those experiences have informed the way you believe, or the degree to which you believe, that the world around you is safe and predictable. My guess is that each one of you, myself included, would have very different answers about the degree to which the world is safe and predictable, and what parts of your world are safe and predictable. And when I ask you to think about what that's been like and how you're managing it, I ask that because all of those feelings, those perceptions, help inform the degree to which you believe that you are lovable, capable, and worthwhile. The degree to which you believe you are lovable, capable, and worthwhile of navigating this world around you. And again, your answer might be different. Your experience might be different depending on varying circumstances. So I ground us there because every single person has beliefs and values and experiences that influence who they are, why they do what they do, and what they need to keep going. You, me, every single individual you work with in social work has those same perceptions of the world around them and perceptions and beliefs about themselves and how they navigate the world around them. And we think about that. Sometimes it's easy to wrap our head around that when we say, well, who's our client? We think about who our client is in terms of individuals. The individuals that we serve when we walk in the doors every day of our employment. Who do we serve there, right? And today, we want to think about who else is our client. Who are the decision makers that you work with every day, in addition to the traditional client that you might otherwise define? You see, macro level work is in fact anchored in people, right? It's not the person that changes when we think about micro, meso, or macro level work. It's the impact. It's about saying if we're doing micro level work, the impact of our work to the individual. And if we're doing macro level work, the impact is broader than that. It's to a community. So I want you to take a minute because we can get caught up in thinking about micro work as focused on an individual only instead of the need of that individual. And with macro level work, it's the same. It actually still, while it focuses on the broader need, does mean you have to do work with individuals. And the work of social worker here can get a little blurred. Hopefully, we are really clear that the work we do with an individual at the micro level is led by the individual. We would never push our agenda or our goals on an individual that we're working with. At the macro level, I think we generally understand that our role can shift more towards advocacy for an entire community or population. So when we work with decision makers, remember people, our advocacy efforts can start to look more like our own agenda, our own goal or hopes for even representing the agenda of a broader community. And we tend to miss the goalpost there because every single person, you know, in the room where it happens, is still an individual first. They have their own values, their own experiences, and their own goals. And if we skip over our foundational skill sets of micro level engagement and intervention, we won't effectively advocate for the needs of the communities the way we had originally set out to do. So, group, I want you to just take a minute, type into the chat box. When you think about who else is your client, who are some of the decision makers that you might directly or indirectly work with on a regular basis in your practice? And go ahead, type some in.
So we're looking for decision makers, right?
Yes.
The director of DSS.
Yeah.
Dean of the School of Social Work.
Yeah.
director of my agency, my family, teachers, principals, school board, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of decision makers in schools, project managers, CEOs, senior leadership.
Yes. Yes. Fantastic. And I started to hear you thinking even outside of maybe a child welfare setting or a traditional social work setting, right? Educators, medical practitioners, legal practitioners, especially in child welfare, right? At any time, you may be interfacing with and working with any of those individuals directly or indirectly. And in macro level social work, they become your clients because macro level social work is about the policies and practices that influence the lives, the opportunities, the supports of individuals that you show up to serve, right? Who is making the policies? Who's operationalizing the policies? Who's enforcing the policies? Even if you are the decision maker, you're not it. You're not the only one that is impacting macro level work. Because if you're the one who writes the policy or signs off on that policy, there are still lots and lots of people that have to operationalize them. Think about child welfare and all of those federal policies that come down, CAPTA and ASPA, and now Families First. Those were policies that were written by people and are operationalized by every single one of us at various levels and have an obligation towards the enforceability of them as well. If everyone's not on board, it still doesn't work. When Dr. Roger Fallett and Dr. Maxine Harris published their work on creating communities of trauma-informed care, they were really clear. They said the greatest success, the greatest outcomes will only be achieved when we start by applying the principles of trauma-informed care with each other within organizations, because that is what shifts culture. Model behavior that is not just about professional decorum. Instead, it's about the recognition that trauma is pervasive. When you are in a professional role, that doesn't exempt you or any other individual or decision maker from a trauma history. So ask yourself, the next time you need to meet with a supervisor, a director, commissioner, CEO, jurist, what lets me know that I created a safe space? What lets me know I demonstrated my trustworthiness, provided choices, collaborated, and promoted empowerment with the decision makers that you are working with? And then ask yourself, what would they say that I did that lets them know my practice is anchored in these 5 principles? Okay. Remember, we all show up every day with experiences that have shaped us and messages that have informed the way we belong. We have assumed roles through life. We have learned how we belong, and some of that has been applied in our work. It's part of how we've gotten here today. And every other decision maker, every other individual in a professional role and capacity brings the same thing with them. And it absolutely impacts what motivates us. It absolutely impacts the way we engage with people. It absolutely impacts what we are and aren't willing to do in a stressful situation, right? So that is not only about how we bring forward our best trauma-informed practice to the individual who's our traditional client. It's about how we bring that trauma-informed perspective, our best trauma-informed self, to the person that is in front of us that we are trying to advocate to for a change in global policy, or maybe even just individual or, local level practice. That idea of what happened when someone is shutting you down, cutting you off, having a hard time wrapping their head around something, not engaging at the policy level, at the colleague level, that idea of what happened, what might be going on for them right now. We don't have to know it to recognize that the way that they're responding could be a stress response, right? We have stress responses. If someone else is operating out of a stress response, those same engagement intervention skills are going to apply there if what we really want to do is impact the work for the outcomes for communities and populations of people that we are here to serve. Okay. So let's dig in a little bit. Remember way back those basic foundational social work theories, right? Our theories of human behavior and our ecological systems theory. Our theories of human behavior help to inform all of why humans do what they do, right? The attachment theories, the social learning, the family systems, the organizational theories, all bring us back down to one fundamental piece: human behavior. Those theories were not written to say, this is what you need to know and understand about an individual who is an incarcerated individual, about a child, about an individual that you're serving who is affected by substance use, who is affected by a medical condition. Those are not the additional parameters of our generalist theories of human behavior. Our generalist theories of human behavior are about humans and understanding its connection with our ecological systems, that anything and everything around us is going to impact and inform, right, how we operate, how human behavior shows up, what needs are looking to be met in any interaction, and how then each of those individuals, right, will interact with each other in various circumstances and create a very complex relationship between multiple individuals and multiple considerations, and influence not only our beliefs and behaviors and attitudes, but also those of other people. We know everything is interconnected. We know that things do not happen in silos. The work of micro and macro social work also do not happen in silos. Anyone working directly in, sorry about that, anyone working directly in an agency providing direct service is always still going to interact with other professionals who are in their own agencies that are also engaging with the same individual that you are there to provide service to. And you have to make decisions together. You have to figure out how to collaborate together. Every person, no matter your role at the micro level, is informed by policies. Some are local, some are state, some are federal, right? And laws and statutes and practices. And it's not only about knowing and understanding them, it's really about knowing and understanding what happened. Where was the evolution of this? How did this come to be? What practice informed research that was going to drive policy that got written? And who are you in connection with that is in the room where it happened? Are you in the room where it happened? What do your approaches look like with those other individuals who are part of making decisions? I want to highlight 2 CSWE competencies. We're going to highlight competency 6 around engagement and competency 8 around intervention. CSWE competency 6 specifically highlights that engagement is something that is ongoing and that it's an interactive process. And notice the words that I've highlighted. It's not only about engagement with individuals, meaning, the individual, again, that you serve in micro level social work practice. It extends to groups. and organizations and communities. And who makes up groups and organizations and communities? People, just people. And I'm going to ask you right now, when you think about communities, type into the chat, what communities come to mind for you? Who are the communities that you would normally be engaging with in your work? Type a few into the chat.
Communities that we would be engaging with. I'm typing in MSW students.
Absolutely.
Immigrants and refugees.
Okay, veterans and refugees, yeah.
Those experiencing hemophilia and other chronic health conditions, elders, youth, schools, the school community, there's the teachers, the students, parents, foster parents and biological parents.
Okay.
Families in the child welfare system, oppressed groups, supervisors and directors, agency staff, interns, social service recipients, nonprofits, university members, national macro social work groups. A really wide range of clients and communities there.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you for that. Thank you, group. So I heard some people starting to stretch that definition of communities, all right? I heard schools, teachers, right, like national constituency members. Absolutely. There are many professions that become communities because the identity of the individuals in those professions, right? The identity of those individuals are steeped in their profession. That sounds familiar to us, doesn't it? I know for myself, a big piece of my identity as a whole is as a social worker. It is not just my job. It is not only my career path, right? The ethics and the values of a social worker speak to me, and it's part of what I embody or work to embody on a daily basis. That is the same for many professions, such as educators, medical practitioners, jurists, attorneys. They become communities in and of themselves. And in those communities, it's reasonable to say that they're made up of people, the legal community, the medical community, the educational community, right? The child welfare community. They're made up of people. And isn't it also reasonable to say that those people have their own experiences and values and beliefs, and probably trauma histories that impact the way they move through the world, right? So when we think about how we engage, take a step back. How do we use our engagement strategies and techniques? Validation and reflection and active listening and transformational communication and relationships. What do those look like when we're working with people who are operating in professional capacities, particularly professional capacities of communities that are different from ours? Think of a time. Think of a time when you worked with someone in a different profession, maybe on a shared case, and you asked them, what brought you to this work? Think of a time when you've asked them, what keeps you in this work? How often are we spending the time speaking to other people in professional capacities at a personal level instead of only at the level of needing to solve a problem? I'm not suggesting it doesn't happen. What I am suggesting is that oftentimes our behaviors, our language, our focus shifts a little bit because we see those individuals a little bit differently. Maybe we expect something different from them, right? We compartmentalize. What am I here to talk to you about? What is this going to be in regards to? I'm here to advocate for someone. Well, again, when we think about that idea of interprofessional collaboration, right? We have to go back to all of those collaborators and think about them first based on how they present in foundation in comparison to human behavior theories and thinking about person in environment. Engagement strategies weren't made for us to use specifically in micro level practice with a population of people who are underserved or vulnerable only. Our engagement strategies were developed at the foundations of humanity, human behavior, everybody being a human. And that's hard because we usually come with an agenda when it's about someone who is in a decision-making capacity, because we know that it's going to impact, right, and affect the person that we were there to serve in the first place. When we think about competency aid, it outlines for us that obligation to understand that intervention is ongoing and interactive. And here again, specifically highlights that it's not just about interventions with individuals, or even maybe groups in kind of our traditional idea of group when we're doing a group intervention in a psychoeducational class, or right in an agency where people are coming to us for a service. It's talking about also organizations and communities. And remember, we just defined communities much differently. The term here, individuals, I would say doesn't only mean the individuals who come through the doors of the courthouse, the school, the hospital, the treatment center. The term individual here also includes the CEO, the jurist, the medical staff, the educator. They are individuals first. And while, you know, we may not be sitting down with decision makers, we might not be sitting down with them to facilitate a specific therapy, right? Actually, certainly not, unless they have come to us in a role of us as a therapist, and that happens to be their professional capacity, but are there for, you know, a service. We are still intervening in their lives. We are intervening in their work. We are intervening in their day. This competency aid, I would say, it calls for us to critically choose and implement evidence-informed interventions and really think about how the foundations and strategies of trauma-informed practices, varying group interventions, problem-solving interventions like solution-focused brief therapy and motivational interviewing can be generalized into our practice with individuals who are also decision makers. Think about the intervention strategies that you know, that you apply on a daily basis in micro-level work. And think about how often you find yourself drawing from those in dialogue and conversations, in advocacy work that you're doing at a policy level. And even if you might not directly be someone who works at a policy level, if you are advocating with any other decision maker on a case, for a specific decision to be made, for an exception to be made to a specific policy or practice, making a recommendation for someone to think about things differently in the way policies get operationalized, you're still engaged in macro level practice. Macro level practice can't exist separate and apart from the micro level work. Every one of us interacts with policy, regardless of the identified individuals that we are assigned to work with. And if you noticed, I actually, in this presentation, pulled in some of those generalized strategies from interventions that are evidence informed. I asked all of you to consider what lets you know, right, that what you're saying and doing with someone is in fact trauma informed. And then I asked you to consider, what is it that they would say? What do you think they would say lets you know you're operating in the same way with them as you would someone who you consider your traditional client? That's a relationship question from brief solution focused therapy. It still works. So often at the policy level, we get stuck, right? We get into this back and forth. You're not hearing me. You're not hearing me. Hear me. You need to understand I'm trying to advocate. Here's all my reasons why. We kind of go into, we need to defend this. We need to argue this. We need to demonstrate the data, the reasons. And while all of that information is necessary, we're still doing that with other human beings who may or may not be able to hear or process any of what we are delivering to them in the moment. And we have to be able to take that step back to say, what's happening for them right now? What are the values that they might bring with them? What are the beliefs they may have about the role that they belong in? What are the things they're trying to manage every day in this work? How might this work have impacted them? And take that step back and use that to inform what engagement strategies we're going to use, and then what pieces of interventions we're going to draw from as we continue to work with them in our obligations and efforts to negotiate, mediate, and advocate with and on behalf of the clients and constituencies that we're there for. Just want to do a check-in, Michael, if any questions have come into the chat.
No questions in the chat.
Okay. And group, please know, any question is a fair question. I'm always okay with a challenge, pushing back, digging deeper. Just let me know. So when we think about the NASW Code of Ethics, our kind of that overall social workers, we have an ethical responsibility to the broader society. And the NASW Code of Ethics 6.04 specifically talks about social workers in social and political action, that we should engage in social and political action. What I find is that sometimes that can be pictured for individuals like lobbying, right? Like working in a politician's office, and so on and so forth. And yes, those are ways to engage in social and political action. Signing petitions, social and political action, again, I would say, happens in your day-to-day work. Day-to-day work, because anyone who is impacting social and political action is a person first. They are a person first. So let's think about this a little bit, right? The NASW Code of Ethics, Rule 1 and Standard 1, and specifically 1.02 talks about social workers' ethical responsibility to clients. And 1.02 discusses the respect and promotion of the right of clients to self-determination, and to assist clients in their efforts towards their identified and clarified goals. Okay. No problem. We talked about this a little bit. But again, when you're working at the macro level, if you need to approach a supervisor, a CEO, a jurist, a medical practitioner, they become your client. How do we get to addressing the advocacy of our direct client or the broader benefit of a community until or unless we first give support to the person right in front of us and give support to that individual, that doctor, that lawyer, that nurse, that teacher, that commissioner, that caseworker, that judge, that they have a right to self-determination as well. And to support them in identifying what their goals are in this process. Oftentimes, we generally have the same goals at a macro level perspective. Generally, we all may have different ideas about how to get there, right? And if what we do is come to each of those individuals to say, I see what's wrong. Here's the problem. Here's what you have to do to fix it. Go for it. How likely is it that that's going to be effective? We know that we would never have a client come into us in an agency. We would never say to them, oh, I see what the problem is. Here's the problem. Here's what you need to do to fix it. Go do that. Here's the steps. You got it. We start with where they're at, what they would say they see, what they would say they understand to be the need. And we work with them to figure out a roadmap that they can live with to make it work. Even if that feels uncomfortable to us because we see the urgency of the situation and we're concerned about the essence of time, we still recognize that if we impose or force our perceptions, our beliefs, our ideas, we will spin our wheels and go nowhere. That is the same fundamental belief when you are in a room of decision makers. When we push and we don't invite them to join, when we don't honor and respect and promote their self-determination, it's still not going to happen, right? They have to be just as engaged. Standard 2.03, under our social workers' ethical responsibilities to colleagues, interdisciplinary collaboration, right? We are called to be members of interdisciplinary teams and to contribute to decisions that affect the well-being of clients. And that our obligation here is to the team as a whole, as well as the individual members, right? So again, where we think about how we work with each other, we still have to take that step back to think about everyone's defined role, drawing from perspectives and experiences, and ensuring that as a whole, everyone there who's a colleague who is going to be part of a decision feels like they're a part of the process. And we don't get to say how they're a part of the process. They get to say that. I would certainly never want to step into a room and have someone else tell me how I'm going to be part of the process. I want to be the one that identifies that. Maybe you got ideas and thoughts that I should be considering, but to direct me about how I'm going to be a part of the process, I'm not going to be as likely, right? Just based on human behavior to engage. If we step into this role as a social worker and apply that ethical responsibility, we know they won't be more likely to join with us and participate in a collaborative process. We have ethical obligations when working as administrators. Standard 3.07, particularly section D, under social workers' ethical responsibilities in practice settings, says that we need to take reasonable steps to ensure that the working environment, right, for which we are responsible is consistent with and encourages compliance with NASW codes of ethics. It says that we should be taking reasonable steps to eliminate any conditions within an organization that are going to violate or interfere with or discourage compliance with that code of ethics. Now, I would say administrators is a pretty broad word. Administrator doesn't only mean the CEO or the commissioner. If you are a supervisor, if you are an intern field education supervisor, you are in a role that gives you responsibility in that practice setting to make sure that the conditions are supportive and consistent with our code of ethics. Because when you do that, it allows for anyone who's working with you in that setting to be able to be in a better place, again, to go and replicate those same practices with everyone else that they come in contact with. And again, right, goes back to creating that culture of trauma-informed practice, that culture of ability for change and collaboration to happen. Social workers also have an obligation under competence, under our ethical responsibilities as professionals. And that is to base our practice on recognized knowledge. And it's supposed to include empirically based knowledge that is relevant to our social work and our social work ethics. Theories of human behavior or ecological perspectives, that's empirically based knowledge. And so again, it really becomes our ethical obligation when working with another practitioner, when working with someone in a different system who maybe doesn't get what we're doing or have the same value that we do, it requires us to still operate from those foundations of a trauma-informed human rights perspective with them, from perspectives of theories of human behavior and ecological theory. Because in doing so, right, again, it's not about professional decorum. In doing so, it's about coming back down to the basic of person to person in order for change to happen. The theory of readiness for change is not something that only applies to someone who, again, is, is affected by substance use. It doesn't only apply to the individual who is engaged with the child welfare system. Theories around change and readiness for change apply to every single person. And when systems have done something the same way for a long period of time, that change is going to be painful and hard and scary for every professional at that level as well, and absolutely must be given the opportunity to help and engage in planning for change, preparing for change, and being supported in any change that's going to happen. And you don't have to be in an administrative role for that to be the case. You can do that because you have social work skills. That is, in fact, the degree that you have and the skills that you have. And then finally, because we have this obligation under our ethical responsibilities to the integrity of the profession, to enhance and improve the integrity of the profession, the more in every single thing we do, every single conversation we have, every single advocacy point we make, the more we do this, we lift up that social workers are in fact operating from evidence-informed, right, perspectives, that we are legitimized as a profession. It does mean that anytime we're interacting in our work, even with other professionals, they only know there's legitimacy to why we do what we do when we really hold to that. And I do want to say something about self-care. In the NASW purpose, they talk specifically about self-care being paramount for competent ethical social work practice. And that's true. And I think oftentimes we think about self-care in terms of what we pour out and what the exposure is that we have when working with a traditional client system, right? Or we might think about self-care in terms of navigating the burnout that can come from the mounds of paperwork that we have to do and the constant pivoting and shifting and learning we might need to do about changing policies. There's some emerging research specifically around moral distress and system-induced trauma that I think are exceptionally important here for us all to be thinking about, especially as we shift to thinking about our role in how we engage in macro level social work. The National Child Welfare Workforce Institute, they took the idea of moral injury, right? Moral injury is something we know that has existed for a period of time now in terms of initial research that was done for veterans who were returning home from war. And what the National Child Welfare Workforce Institute has done is really open a discussion around moral distress. The idea that Moral distress happens when a professional knows the ethically appropriate action, but can't take that action due to either internal or maybe even external, right? Those institutional constraints that lead to painful feelings and psychological difficulties. Child welfare caseworkers, child welfare practitioners face morally complex situations on a daily basis, and it's not acknowledged very often. There is a wear and tear that happens when we witness amongst ourselves and amongst other professionals doing this work with us, choices that get made that do not in fact help the very family, child, or person we are all there to help. System-induced trauma is about circumstances where our expectation is to depend on a system to deliver assistance or to provide support and create safety for individuals, for communities, for families. But instead, what happens is those systems create harm and trauma, even if they were systems that were designed to mitigate the trauma. I think again about some of our federal policies in child welfare, CAPTA and ASPA, and we know that we are in a space now of really being called to unpack those federal policies that messaging has said they're supposed to be safe and helpful. And we know on a regular basis, there is harm that is induced as a result of some of those, the systemic practices that come with obligations to comply with the federal and state and local policies that exist. And I say this to you because it's a whole new level. It's a whole new layer that we are now having to grapple with. How do we recognize that this might be coming up for us, and how self-care isn't only about how we take care of ourselves when we've had exposure and stress around the individuals that we're working with it. How do we now also think about taking care of ourselves and each other when we have these additional layers of being called to do work and make choices that we might know in our core doesn't feel right, where we are trying to impact change in systems where harm is created? Because again, it puts us in a place of wanting to fight and advocate, and we're motivated to do that, which is good. And systems are still made up of people who have to operationalize all those policies. And so it calls for us to take one step back again, to get back into our space and go right back to using those basic intervention and engagement strategies, quite honestly, in spaces where there might otherwise be a presumption that we expected them to know better and do better. And it's not happening. It's not about blame. It's about the reality that it's not happening. And we have one more layer of knowing that as hard as it is, if we let ourselves fall into a mode of fighting and advocating without first understanding that that decision maker in front of us is a person, we still will not be able to move further in terms of what our initial goal was towards advocacy. And I really want to highlight this idea and discussion of power and privilege that gets discussed in our obligations around our social competencies and also in our obligations around our code of ethics. Think about the strategies that you use, the things you say and do when you are working with an individual in a micro level practice. You should be able to say and do the exact same thing when you are working with a decision maker at the macro level, even if their position of power is perceived to be greater than yours. Right? We are not here to receive or to learn or to operate a degree and it felt right or it seems like the right thing to do. If we really know and believe that our work in social work is legitimate, that it is supported by science and backed by evidence, then we should know that anything that we say and do, it can happen regardless of where the position of power falls. Whether we're in a position of perceived power or privilege with the individual we're there to serve, or the other person, the other decision maker, the higher title, the higher authority is in a position of perceived power and privilege. Because we know that our actions, our language, our rationale is always going to be anchored in trauma-informed perspectives and evidence-informed practice that is anchored in solely human behavior towards effectiveness and towards safety and collaborative work. I'll check to see if we have any questions.
Well, thank you so much. I know people have their cameras off, but I'm going to start the round of applause. I particularly liked how you connected the macro level work that you do to the micro skills and the micro foundational skills that that we're taught in the School of Social Work. And it makes me think about sort of, I have a strange relationship with the term macro, whereas I do it and I like it. I also think that it sort of unnecessarily like others that form of social work, and it's really the same thing, just in a different setting. And I think you did a really good job of describing that. I never thought about how when most social workers are using their micro intervention skills, they're often the person in power delivering a service to a client, and that we can also use those intervention skills when, the power dynamic is completely shifted. So thank you. You made me think a lot, gave me some goosebumps, and I appreciate it. So we have about 5 minutes left. So you can just unmute yourself and ask a question if you have one. And again, thank you, Aimee. Amanda or Pat, I see that you each put your cameras on. My hope is, do you have a question or comment? We can't hear you, Pat.
Just a comment to Aimee. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. That I really appreciated your statement towards the end, that it's not about blame, it's about what's not happening, and that being able to refocus on what the problem is that we'd like to work on, again, is a form of safety, and is like, oh, okay, I'm not being personally under the microscope. So that was just a nice turn of phrase and helped me. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. It's hard. This work is hard work, and it takes a toll on us. And I think we get really good at figuring out how to not let that spill over into the work we do with individual clients. And it's another layer to say, now I need to really think about how I make sure that doesn't spill over into the work that I'm doing with the other professionals and the decision makers who might be contributing to what the harm is, even though that's not the intention. And that recognition and that acknowledgement that moral distress exists for them just as much as for you, right? And for me, so that we can take care of ourselves in the right way, so that we can show up. We're the ones that have this skill. We're the social workers, right? Other professions might not necessarily have this.
I also appreciated your tidbit on that they might be operating out of a stress response and we're not realizing that. I have come from a CAC background, so I often sit at the table with multidisciplinary members from the police to social welfare who are on two different opposite ends of the table. But I like how you said, do we ever take the time to sit back and say, like, why did you get into this field? Because at the end of the day, when we do come around, we all want the same outcome. And I think we forget that. And I think we forget that a lot of us are responding in a stress reaction. So I appreciate you highlighting that.
Thank you, Tara.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, I I really enjoyed that. I recorded it, which I am great. Someone in the chat just wrote, this is a great and empowering talk, and I agree. And we had several people say that they wanted to attend, but they had a conflict, so they're looking forward to the recording. So Aimee might get some email comments from some people who watch it later once we get it up on YouTube. So thank you so much, Aimee, for agreeing to do this. It was fantastic, far exceeded my expectations, which were already high. Thank you, everyone who joined us today to hear more about macro practice. And thank you all. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Michael.
Have a good one.